Welcome aboard, wherever you are and however you may be joining us. We're glad you're here. Thank you for tuning in as Mike podcast or Bible study. I don't even know what we're calling this at this point, but welcome along for the ride as me and Michael Ray banter and discuss biblical things. We've been working on and discussing Christians in the workplace and how we deal with maybe some difficult situations, how we deal with some concepts, and how we can truly be workers for God no matter where we are. So that's if that's not the podcast you're looking for, then you may want to turn around and exit here. That's kind of like, when you get on a plane, if anybody remembers what flying's like and they tell you where we're going, we hope that you're in the right seat. If you'll tune in for a while, I think you'll learn something. Michael, how's everything in beautiful Somerset?
Everything is great, my friend. It's a beautiful morning. I'm curious how long, and you put some thought into that welcome aboard because that's different. You to be honest, you put some thought into that.
A little bit, and mostly because I've got Denny's voice in the back of my head saying, you keep saying good morning, and I can't get away from it.
No, everything is good. Looking forward to the conversation.
Perfect. We have a co-host of sorts this morning. However, due to work schedules and the crazy schedules of trying to get two of us together, he has actually emailed in questions. And so Joe Gerlach, who is a member here in Danville at the Danville Church of Christ, Joe's a loyal listener and stays up on the podcast and always gives us good feedback. And when we were talking about some of the questions of leadership and how you make decisions, I'd asked Joe if he could sit in with us, and we could make it work to get him on the screen. But he did email in several questions for Michael and I, and so I'll kind of let Joe more or less from his email ask us the questions, but I'll read them out loud. So Michael, I'll tee you up first. Occasionally, as a leader, you might be asked to protect the company by not telling the truth. How do you handle this? Or perhaps you're told not to tell everything you know. Is there a difference between lying and not telling everything we know? And as a Christian, are we being deceitful if we do not be forthcoming with everything that we know?
We should probably before we answer that question, we should probably give a header here that this today's lesson, it kind of tends toward leadership and towards culture, and so a lot of the questions are kind of more Christian leader focused that our friend sent in. So good question, right? That can you get put in a situation where you're asked to be less than truthful? So obviously, got all the verses about honesty and lack of deceit, and put away malice and deceit and hypocrisy, and 2 Peter 2:1, all that kind of all those kind of ideas. I think we've all got that as the background, but maybe important to note. And I think because we believe that Christian leaders, I believe, tend toward more transparency. At least that has been my impression. It's certainly been my goal. I think it's been my impression that Christian leaders tend toward more transparency, that they want less in the dark, and I think that's a good goal. So I'll say that as a baseline comment. Also, I think also common sense would tell us that it is not reasonable, or is it good business habit, or is it even possible to be fully 100% transparent with every piece of company information all the time to everyone like that? Right. So we got those two extremes. We desire this transparency, but we understand that, like, everybody knows everything. It's not reasonable or practical. It's we want to, if let's talk employee facing first. If we're talking to employees, we want them to understand in general why corporate decisions are being made, but we don't it's not, again, it's not reasonable or practical to take them through every step of corporate finance about what this could do to our debt covenant ratios and why we have to make this decision on this capital expenditure next year instead of this year for depreciation purposes or whatever. I get tugged down accounting, I guess, too quickly, but whatever the intricacies of that, or frankly, some of it for legal reasons you can't do it. I can't tell you the medical condition of your coworker for legal reasons. So there's all kinds of reasons why, complete, everything I know, and we both know everything there is to know. That's not reasonable or practical. For customer facing issues, if I'm talking to a customer or client, is it reasonable to tell them, to be 100% just share all the corporate secrets about, here's our margin on this product, and here's what, here are the issues that we're having in sourcing this product, and again, it's just not reasonable or practical that you share all those things. And here are all the personal issues of all of our second shift employees that are causing you these production issues. It's not reasonable. And so I think we have to be honest, for sure, that everything we say out of our mouth is honest, but it's not reasonable or practical to be complete. That even sounds bad when you say it. It's not reasonable or practical to share everything that you know.
Right. Along those lines. So I think all of us understand and realize, and if you've been in business or even read the newspaper, um, companies that aren't out in front of and own their problems and mistakes get destroyed for it. The best and first thing you should always do, especially publicly traded companies, is that if you have a problem, own it. Look, this is what happened. We messed up. Here's what we're doing to fix it. If you lie or if you continue to tell the public that you don't have a problem when you still have a problem, your stock price and your company will be greatly punished for that. So, I think we've learned that lesson just looking back at Boeing, there's several other examples I could point to, not to pick necessarily on just Boeing stock, but it was a $400 stock. Now it's a $150 stock, all because they wouldn't own some issues that they had. So, that's got to be very clear that you have to own that. That's good business policy as well as just as a Christian. Now, to Michael's point, and I agree, there's some things that are proprietary that you can't share. You can't, tell your customers how you determine your pricing model. That's proprietary information. You're out of business if everybody knows everything that you do. Just like I'm pretty sure there's, if you walk into KFC, they don't tell you what the 12 herbs and spices are, right? Because if you can make your own chicken, why are you paying them $20 a bucket? But I think there is a level of honesty, and when we talk about honesty, is truly here's what the problem is without divulging proprietary stuff, right? So, if you've got a shipment, if you're working in a manufacturing facility and you've got a shipment of parts that go out to the customer, and those parts are bad for whatever reason, I think it's reasonable and honest for you to say, hey, here's what our problem was, right? These parts are bad. We had a production issue. We had a line issue. We had something, as opposed to saying, I hired my sister's idiot kid and he ain't that smart, but he needs a job. And, I really like my sister, and every part that he touched was bad last night. You get into that level of detail, and I don't think the customer wants to know that first and foremost. But secondly, there's some level of detail, again, to Michael's point, that's not reasonable, that's not expected. I think to the other degree, though, that's honest, and maybe the root of the question is, when your supervisor comes to you and says, hey, you need to go to your customer and tell them this really isn't our fault. This came from one of our other suppliers. This came somewhere upstream. This is FedEx's fault. This is UPS's fault. It's not that we didn't get it on the truck last night. It's that they're idiots. you know, when you start playing that kind of blame game and you're asked to be put in a position where you're less than honest with your customer about what happened, um, that's a problem to me. So let me throw that back at you, Michael. So what do you do confronted with that? How do you, your supervisor comes in and says, Michael, here's what happened, or what happened, and he says, no, we're going to blame it on somebody else. We're going to blame it on another third party. How do you handle that when you're asked specifically to be dishonest?
So a couple things. One, I didn't see this coming this morning, but I had to Google KFC, and it's because 12 herbs and spices didn't sound right, and it's 11, and
It's
so
11.
I want that for the record, to just to show the born and raised Kentuckian knew that. Uh, the
I'm a carpetbagger.
yeah, there's well, clearly you're trying to add a spice. There's a obviously there's a question about intent, and is there an intent to deceive? And so if there's if a Christian's being put in a situation where a supervisor or business leader comes in and says, hey, here's the message that we're going to give to the whether it's the public or the employees or the customers, and it is deceptive. If the intent is to deceive, we've hit one of these moral crossroads, and we're going to make a really hard decision. And and it it may be that our response needs to be in a practical way. It says, okay, hey boss, here's what I'm comfortable saying, because this is true. And I'm comfortable saying this, that this is a shared issue, that we had some issues and UPS had some issues, or we had some issues and something else happened. And I'm fine not getting into the details of that, but what you're asking me to do, I'm uncomfortable with. Uh, Man, that's a hard conversation, but sometimes we get to those moral crossroads, and I'm not advocating that we try to find a kind of a Weasley way out, or try to spin the situation. But I think we all choose our words carefully, right? And I think that there are ways that we can, by choosing our words carefully, convey what the customer or the employee needs to know in an honest way, um, um, without perhaps revealing some of the corporate secret internal kind of issues that may have caused the problem. Hey, we've got a problem. It's not your problem. It's our problem. We've got a problem, and we're working to address it, and to fix it. I think you do hit those moral crossroad moments periodically. I was trying to think of a biblical parallel, um, and I'm not sure it works exactly, but I was thinking about Balaam. That he was asked to uh, prophesy something that was not. He was asked to deceitfully do that, um, and because of the influence of God, even though he probably wanted to, he wasn't able to do that. I kind of hope that we have that same spirit, that when we're asked to prophesy something falsely, that the spirit of God within us doesn't allow us, not in the same way, but doesn't allow us to do that. I think maybe that's kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah, and I think here's the difficult part of this. You know, it, and I think we have to be honest about it too, right? We're talking about honesty. Is you and me academically on a podcast can say, yeah, you stick to your guns and you tell them that you can't do this. Um, but we've also been in a situation where it may cost you your job. If you buck up. Here's the thing: you may not be working with a bunch of other Christians. There may be plenty of people in line behind you that's happy to tell the company story in your stead to replace you. So I think that's a legitimate fear, and I think maybe a legitimate reason why people would struggle with this. Um, I've been fortunate enough, in my career to be respected by my higher ups and be respected by the people that are making those decisions. And so, when I push back with things like this, like, hey boys, let's think about this, um, that my voice has been heard. But I know not everybody's had that luxury. My advice would be, the same as Michael's, is that, I think you say, hey, look, I'm comfortable here. I'm not comfortable going any further than this. And, if that means you don't want me delivering this message, then that's okay. Because I can't, I can't go to these customers and tell them something that's not true. I can't go to my employees, my staff, and tell them something that's just blatantly false. um, and I know there's been I think about friends of mine that work in manufacturing where the message has been to as they're making changes within the factory, hey, we're just we're doing some upgrades, we're making these changes, everything's going to be great, when in reality they're shutting down the plant and shipping your stuff to Mexico. You're just boxing it up for them. And as a supervisor, you're told to go tell them to be productive and do this, that, it's about maintenance or some other garbage. When in reality, it's not going to be there. Those are tough, right? Because you're trying to maintain a relationship, and they're shutting it down anyway. So what's it matter if they axe you here in 6 months? So those things are hard, and they're real. It's not just these academic questions we're with. Um, but what I've also learned is that I don't care what field you're in. If you're in manufacturing, if you're in sales, if you're in banking, if you're in insurance, whatever, um, those worlds are small too. Right? If you're in manufacturing with one firm, other manufacturing firms kind of get to know who you are because they see you around, see you at different things. And um, what I've learned throughout my career is that integrity is always remembered. Hey, you did things the right way, and that works out for you later. More so than somebody that gets a reputation within their industry, within their sector, of being sleazy. That stuff's remembered too. I can't speak. I'm not a manufacturing guy. I've been in banking my whole career. But we know people at other banks, and other banks know us, and what somebody's reputation is, what they stand for. And there's been a lot of times, and I've worked for I think 5 or 6 banks at this point. um, but it's amazing that when somebody is coming over from a bank that I used to work for, no matter what position it is within our bank, um, somebody will call me and say, hey Mike, you worked here, tell me about them. What do you know about them? What how are they? And so I think you've got reputation risk if you're less than honest, if you're deceitful, if you don't, you know, uh, if you don't have some integrity and values behind you.
Yeah, and Proverbs would tell us that the value of our name and our reputation, right, is critically important. And so I think that goes along with what you're saying. One other note, just on that conversation that you may need to have with your superior is, the attitude that you take into that conversation is very important, and
Yes.
many times affect the outcome. If you go in with a self-righteous belligerence, you can kind of expect some blowback on that.
It's going to end poorly.
Yeah, I mean, if you go in with a little grace and humility, say, hey, I know this is you're being put in a tough position here, and we all are. Um, I just want to give you my point of view here, and why I feel the way I do about this, and I'm comfortable saying these things. But if you these other things I'm not comfortable with, because I'm not, first of all, I'm not sure they're true. I think if you have a graceful conversation about that and handle it in the right way, and you've got obviously your past, your own past has some bearing on how that is taken. Also, if you've been if you've been
If you lie regularly,
right,
your
if you've
boss
been
is going to have a hard time about that.
correct, if you've been a less than stellar employee and have truth issues of your own, but then all of a sudden your moral compass gets pinged, it's a little harder to take. So our own reputation deals in that also. what gets really difficult, I think, but if we're being honest, it has to be considered, is if you go in with as much humility and grace as you can, and the response is overwhelmingly negative, that no, you have to do this, that then again, it's not an academic question. It's a real hard question, and we may have to think about, is this the is this the supervisor that I work for, or is this the company that I work for? Um, because there are unfortunately there are organizations that kind of have this systemic deceit, and it becomes a real hard question of, is this really the place that I need to be spending 40 hours of my week? Because a little leaven leavens the whole lump, and uh, all that. It's hard to be the um, Elijah in in a culture of deceit. And so those are hard questions. I think where we work does matter. Yeah, you can keep your integrity no matter where you are, but where you work matters. And you, in my judgment, if the culture is that toxic, if the culture is that deceptive, and it's not just your supervisor, but it's the institution, man, that brings on some hard questions. And again, we're not advocating for some knee jerk um, walkout of employees, but some prayerful consideration of, is this really where I want to spend my work life?
Right. And I want to touch on a couple of things that Michael said there. Where you work matters. I'll kind of go in reverse order. Where you work matters. If you work for a brothel and you're the accountant at the brothel, you're going to have a hard time convincing them about honesty, right? I mean, we're running a brothel. Uh, there's some industries I think that Christians should not be involved in. That I don't think there's any good way out of it. But the other thing I think that's absolutely critical is that our reputation and our values that we hold matter, especially in times like this. If you are the guy that's always trying to cheat the time clock, if you are always trying to live in the gray area of the company and, just, barely not violate policies, if you're on a performance improvement plan, once a year and you do just enough to get off of it, if that's what your career is at work and all of a sudden you wake up one day with integrity, it smells bad and it don't feel bad it don't feel good from a management standpoint. Now, if you are, you know, doing all the things that we've talked about, working as under God, your morals, your honesty, you've always shown and demonstrated that in the workplace. I think that conversation's a lot easier with the supervisor, right? I think it's a whole lot easier to come in there with some grace, have our words seasoned with salt, and say, look, I mean, you know me. I've been here for years. I, I can't do this. And you know why I can't do this. Let's, here's some things I can say. Here's offer an alternative solution, or say, look, maybe the answer here is you either got to find somebody else, or let's try to come up with something else to say. um so I think all of those things matter. I also think this is a great kind of dovetail into the next question that he sent, which was, leaders create a culture of a group, both large and small, and as Christian leaders, what steps can we take to be an agent of change for the culture of our work group, organization, or company? So maybe in these situations that it's not just us by ourselves, but if we can create a culture of honesty, of integrity, of uprightness, of all of those things around us, maybe that helps insulate. So Michael, how do you do that in 2020 corporate America? How do you, with you know rules and HR and all that stuff, how do you create a Christian culture, or to steal a very popular phrase of today, a bubble? How do you give yourself a little bubble there in the workplace?
So I think that's largely what this whole podcast is about, right?
Mhm.
Kind of boiled down to a real real distilled, distinct thought. Um, not sure I got the prescription there. Here's some thoughts. One, you can't fake it. Um, that
100%.
this disingenuous cultures, they are, you can sniff them out from a long way away. And so the a no, we care about our employees, and we care about, serving our customers, and we care about the quality of our product. When those things don't match the realities of the decisions that are made, is sniffed out really quick. So it has to be genuine. And so you got to decide if you're willing to be genuine about those questions. And then it's a long term process. Um, that it doesn't happen overnight. That the formation of culture is a time consuming process, and we have, internally in our own organization, where we've had issues. We say this is turning a yacht, guys. We can't, you can't expect this to be fixed tomorrow. That we got to be consistently, whatever those principles and values that we're trying to uphold. Obviously, we want to be Christian, but whichever ones specifically that we're got to be consistent about. Um, you got to be, um, over time, consistent about applying those the same way every time. And so it happens little by little. And then there's a ton of biblical precedents for that kind of idea, right? That how did the Israelites take Canaan? God didn't just wipe out the Canaanites and let them waltz in. They took it little by little, and God said there was a reason for that. I think that these kind of issues are much the same way, that we win these battles little by little. So it has to be genuine. You got to expect that it's got to be consistent over time. And three, yeah, if we're trying to create a Christian culture, um, I think I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, for the unbeliever that may be in the ranks. Um, and again, you're going to be better than I am about answering this question from a corporate perspective. I don't have a corporate perspective, but but you know, in a kind of a less corporate outing perspective, I guess, when there's an unbeliever in the ranks, I think you got to be able to make the case why these Christian values are better for him also. In that, if even though you and I might believe it, that we're going to take these Christian values, and if they force us to go down with the ship, we're going to go down with the ship. And we would probably say that, right? If it came to
Yeah.
it, we'd hold our values rather than hold the business. I'm not sure that you can take that message to the production floor, to the unbelievers, and say we're gonna hold these are the Christian values we believe, and they may cause us to go under. It's not particularly motivating. What
Right.
what what I think that I believe is, say, hey, here's why these Christian values. Here's why the value of honesty and integrity and responsibility and accountability. Here's why they create a better work environment. Not only do we believe that morally it's a better way to live, but they create a better and a more productive work environment. And that's why they work in this organization. It shouldn't surprise us that they work. God kind of aligned the system, our social structures, where when we are kind and graceful and honest, that the whole, any social structure works better. It should make sense to us that businesses work the same way. But I think you got to make that case, that we're not force feeding Christianity to you. I think we have an influence, and we have off hours responsibilities to try to teach those lessons. But hey, unbeliever on the production floor, the reason we believe in truth and accountability and grace is because it's going to make this a more productive work environment also. I think those things do work together.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to take a different line on this. Not different in that I disagree with you. I agree with everything you said, but I think so. How do you get there, right? And I think, especially in the corporate world, um, you get there with you first, right? That, to create this culture,
Well said.
these got to be values that you live by. And then your sphere or your bubble starts to expand by those that you're closest to. You can say, maybe I can't control um, the corporate culture of XYZ publicly traded company, but I can control my office. I can control my 10 feet of production line. I can control where I'm at and what I'm doing. And I think that's what's important, is that when you live by these values that are important, when you live by these, and I've said this from the pulpit for years, that, I mean, tell me one thing that God asks us to do that doesn't just make you a better dude, just make you a better person. I mean, let's take the eternity out of it for a minute. I mean, it's as crazy as that sounds, but just take that out for a minute and say we're just trying to be good people. I mean, I can't tell you one, either you should be doing this or you shouldn't be doing this, that doesn't make you better.
Hey,
So
isn't that, not to interrupt, but isn't that essentially what the preacher says in Ecclesiastes? He says
right,
he looked at things under the sun, right? He didn't have an eternal perspective, and yet he still found that this was, anyway, he still found this was the right way to live.
right. It's just you're just a better person. It makes you a better father, makes you a better mother, makes you a better parent, makes you a better child, makes you a better boss, makes you a better worker. I mean, all of those things I think all fit together. It works. To your point, you know, it's amazing if the creator designed us. How do we work best together? We follow biblical principles. That's how a society works. And all a company is, if you think about it, and again, I don't want to get too philosophical on you, but all a company is a society. I mean, you've got a society toward a common goal. The company XYZ is not that much different than the county or the city you live in. It's people that are there together for a common purpose and common goals, that are trying to bring out the best in each other. That's what it is. So now we're inside the four walls of the workplace. So how do I do that? I think you've got to be very careful in the society we live in a very litigious society, to not overtly push somebody. But listen, I don't think, if you throw lawsuits out of it, I don't think coming in and hitting somebody with the Bible is a good idea anyway. I don't think telling your coworker that they're going to burn in hell is a great way to start a spiritual conversation. I've always been against that. What I do think is, when you live and act and react in a certain way, that you're spreading salt and light, and that people will look to you and say, hey, you're different here, and why. That opens the door for those conversations. I've been in management for a long time, and I can influence the people that are on my team. We do things a certain way, and my team will always do things that way, even if it's anti against the company message, as much as I can control it, right? Most supervisors, even within the company, have some wiggle room. Here's the company directive, but I can mold that into what I want it to be. And I can come to my employees with the honest, here's the company line. Here's what's really going on. That this is a cost reduction effort. This is a margin grab. This is whatever. But here's what we're going to do about it. Here's our message. Here's how we're going to be able to do that. And what I've found over the years is, what that does, that level of honesty, of being able to not only communicate what the corporate's message is, but also to shape it and what it should be, that creating that culture, even just within that small team, it leads to benefits, leads to people looking and wanting to change. And I think that's where you've got to start. So it starts with me, and it starts with that, however I can influence that circle. But the thing about it is it's also attractive. You can get more and more people in that circle. Before you know it, you've got not just maybe your people and your team, but you've got your office or your floor or your building or your facility, as opposed to maybe not all over the corporation. And as you move up, if you are blessed and fortunate enough to move up the corporate ladder, that culture comes with you, right? The things that if you had integrity as a frontline worker, hopefully you'll have integrity in the C-suite too. That should just get better. And I think that's really what it takes. It's the same thing. I'm not convinced that the answer to changing the corporate culture is baptizing your CEO. But maybe it's working from the bottom up. Let's see if we can influence all the workers, and if we influence all the workers, then they'll influence management, and you go kind of grassroots up. I think sometimes we get this idea that, if we can elect a Christian president, then everything will flow down. That's not the way it works. If we change the hearts of the people, that changes everything going up the ladder. At least that's kind of how I see it.
So the people on this award-winning podcast started a brief and unsuccessful campaign for hashtag Be Salty, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're talking about, is that salt influences people. And from a biblical perspective, I love this. I love the analogy that meat left to itself rots.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you corporate cultures left to themselves rot, and
Amen.
that shouldn't surprise us. That's just what meat does. Meat's just doing what it does.
Mm-hmm.
What changes that is salt, and the influence of Christians in that environment as a preservative, um, and so the influence that Christians bring. We often talk about it in families and in churches and in communities, but there's no reason why it would be different in the workplace. Just the impact of salty lives is a big deal.
It's the word we used through that study a few years ago now. That's scary. But anyway, is that these attributes are distinctive, right? It's just like, I think everybody's done this at some point. You bit into something that had too much salt on it. You knew right away what it was. You knew right away that, that was a little too salty. It's got a distinctive flavor. It's got a distinctive taste. And I think as Christians, that's those attributes are distinctive in the workplace. So we've only got a few minutes for the last question, which probably deserves more of our time, and we may come back to it in the future. But actually, there's two, but I'm gonna zero in on number 4. One of your best performing managers by company standards, so we're talking the guy that wins the trophies at the sales meetings, is absolutely morally bankrupt. Openly lies, uses profanity, openly speaks of immoral activity to his group. However, he's hitting every measurable target. How do you handle him? If you're a manager, how do you handle him? If you're a coworker, if you're a peer, how do you handle him? He's having a negative impact on the group. Again, the culture you're trying to create of moral uprightness is being, getting its teeth kicked in by your top performer who's a scumbag. How do you, again, then look at it both ways. What if he's on your team, or what if he's your team leader? So how do you handle morally bankrupt Bob at your facility, Michael Ray?
So I think we touched on a similar question on another one of our studies, and I'm going to fall back on that answer first, and then I'll let you move on from there. I'm not sure I can give you a biblical directive here. I'll give you Michael's answer from a business perspective. Is that I think culture is more important than any one employee, and the short-sightedness of coddling a morally bankrupt employee that has a corrosive effect on your corporate culture is, it is the definition of trading a short-term win for a long-term loss. And I just don't think that we can be willing to take that trade. So that's a long way from saying, what do you do? I think that's the perspective we have to bring to it. So, I hope I go back to the answer of, I hope, my belief is that the culture makes that employee incredibly uncomfortable, and that leads to friction that either leads to change one way or the other, either changing that attitude or changing that employment.
So if you're either one, new to the podcast, or two, haven't been paying very close attention, one of the things that makes these conversations cool is that Michael works for a small business, a family-owned small business. I work in corporate America for publicly traded companies and always have. So it's interesting when we have these back and forths of how to handle stuff, because it's absolutely right. At Small Business America, you can create a culture. And I think the words we used were the culture will choke him out. That you create a culture that's so rich and so deep that it runs them off. Okay. And I think in Small Business America, absolutely you can do that. Where I live in publicly traded America, numbers are everything. Uh, and if you have the top numbers and are winning sales awards, they will, the better and bigger your numbers are, the more that they will apologize for you and your terrible behavior. Is kind of what you learn in corporate America. So in my world,
So is that, pause, is that not just like an indictment of corporate America? I mean, that's what you
yes,
just
100%.
said. What you just said is just an indictment of, like, if what you said is, and I'm sure there's
always exceptions. I'm being general. Yeah.
There's exceptions to every rule. But if what you said is generally true, that is a profound indictment of everything that corporate America is built on. But continue.
Yes. As you throw stones from the shadows of small business. But
listen,
yes,
you talk about a bubble. I'm happy to admit that I live this little sheltered existence, and I'm by the way, I'm really cool with that. That I live this little blessed, sheltered existence in this little bubble. But like, for my little bubble, just the fact that you say that sentence, like, that is, I understand, like, academically, that it is often true, but when I stack that against what my ideal scenario is in my world, just the fact that you say the sentence is so absurd. Like, it's like, anyway, I'll stop interrupting.
Yeah, and everybody who's listening to this podcast that's worked for publicly traded companies understands that, and everybody who's on Michael's side that has worked at small family companies, I'm sure, feels your frustration. So I'm glad to know that you're not jealous of publicly traded America.
You can have it, my dude.
So here's the thing. So what do you do? How do you handle that? I think if you're in leadership, so if I've got a top performing sales guy on my team, so my world's also a little different. I'm, as most of you know, we talked about this. I'm a financial planner. If you are morally bankrupt, eventually you will create a compliance problem for me, and you'll hurt a client. That's just the way that it goes. If you don't have some integrity and uprightness about you, eventually you will become a compliance problem for me. We are very heavily regulated. There are, not only do you have to do certain things, but you have to do them in a certain order, and things have to be documented. And what we found over the course of years of being in this space is that if you will cheat, lie in small things, you'll do it to a client, and you'll ultimately hurt the firm. Because at the end of the day, that's what has to happen. If one of my brokers lies to a client, misleads a client, intentionally is deceptive, and that client loses money, guess who's got to pay for that? Banks got to step in and write a check. And that's a problem. Believe me, we've had it happen, and the accountants hate it when I have to come ask for money to make something right. So
okay, pause again. So again, for my bubble, let me tell you what I just heard. Lying and cheating and immorality is a problem when it creates a regulatory issue.
yes,
every sentence is such an indictment of, like, it's unbelievable.
Okay, Pollyanna. I get that nobody lies in small business America. And then,
Anyway,
we're all monsters over here. But
when you hold on, when you just the concept of, sincerely, the concept of, when you replace standards of morality with regulatory standards, man, we have got a nightmare. That is largely the problem with a lot of the business world, is the regulatory legal environment becomes a standard of morality, and that is a nightmare.
Right. Well, and here's the deal. In corporate America and publicly traded America, when you're dealing and answering to shareholders, we love our employees and our customers, but we love margins more. And so that's just corporate America. I mean, if you are traded on a public exchange, you love the margin more than you love anything else. And so whatever you got to do to hit said margin ends up being the day. And you know that you can hear people talk about how we have these corporate values, but you know, look at big companies like Procter and Gamble and how their corporate values in the 50s are rolling over in their graves with corporate values today and what they're embracing. So it's going to go with the tide. It's going to go with the times, and it's always going to be a moving target because you're trying to um, satisfy and appease a certain group or a certain demographic. Excuse me. So back to having somebody in your team. So if you have somebody in your team that's morally bankrupt, again, it's going to lead to regulatory issues. So I try to, as best as I can, run them off and be harsh on them and things, because regardless of what your production is, at some point you're a liability. If you're, my philosophy is, if you are morally bankrupt, you are just a liability waiting to happen. I just don't know when it's going to happen, but you're absolutely a liability. When you have to work for that guy or girl in this example, when you have to report up to them and they're morally bankrupt and that's the leader of your team, that's hard, because they often speak for the team and will often be the ones to report your numbers honestly or twisted. There's a lot of fudge to some of these numbers if you get down to it, of things you can count versus can't count. And so that puts you in a very difficult place too, that you've got to stand on your own. You've got to make sure that you're making relationships with other forms of management or areas of management to where you kind of got to create some distance. Is the way I've done it in my career. Is we may work together, but that's not really my guy. I'm over here, he's over there, and you all make whatever decisions you want to make, but I'm out on that. So I think in the same way, when you're trying to establish culture, one of the things is you bring in people that want the same culture you have, but you also have to cause great distance as much as you possibly can with those that are morally bankrupt. So you've got to, all the more be on your P's and Q's, all the more, make sure that you're being distinctive, because you can end up guilt by association. And I've seen that happen. I've seen whole teams get fired over a leader because, well, they're all Joe's guys. And so if he's a scumbag, his whole team must be, because they've all, they're all thick as thieves. So we're just going to get rid of that entire team and run them off and bring in new people because we think it's that toxic and that's poisonous. But usually that's, again, after a regulatory issue, not necessarily because you fudge the timesheet. In my world, production revenue covers a multitude of sins. The higher that production, the more sins that they're willing to put up with. But here's the thing: the minute that it falls off, all of those bad sins come back to bat. So if you're number one producer for multiple years, they'll put up with just about anything. If all of a sudden you drop down and you're number 15, not only are this year's sins, but every sin going backward are also applicable now, and you're out. And I've seen guys fall off, go through a divorce, have some personal issues in their production, fall off, and then the company hates them. Like, we've always hated you, we just tolerated you. Now that you've come back down to earth, you're out. And so it's a double-edged sword to play with.
There's a whole other podcast about about how do we square this circle, because there is a dissonance. Like you think that I'm Pollyanna, and I think that you are incredibly cynical. And
I am incredibly cynical.
But sincerely, there is a whole conversation about if that is the world that exists, how do you start to change that world? And I think that's what we're talking about is, can you have enough influence in culture, even in corporate America, where you can change the culture where you are? And my bet is that your team doesn't have that level of issue because of your influence. And so anyway, I'm not, my optimism for humanity is such that I'm not sure that I'm buying all the all of the cynicism. I'm confident that it exists, but it has to be able to be overcome, or else you'd be run off.
And that's accurate. The issue is, and what most of us come to, and I'm talking about the other listeners we have out here that are in the corporate world where I am. What you come to is you end up, kind of tolerating it and trying as much as you possibly can to insulate yourself from it. That, at the end of the day, I can control my team, my office, my space, and that's who I spend 60 hours a week with, right? If the CEO is a scumbag, I mean, I don't ever see the guy, so I don't necessarily care. So you kind of end up creating this dissonance with, all I can control is my little world. And so we live in that little world that we can control, and you learn to try to, mitigate corporate facts. But really, and I like the way you said that. That's all we're trying to do in this podcast. Truthfully, since we went to this, from stewardship to Christians at work, is how do we make sense out of any of these things? How do I create a culture? How do I lead, even if I'm not, in the C-suite? How do I do that? How do I make that influence and impact on the world? Because I think all of us want to do that. At least, that's my Pollyanna sense. I think we all want to do that. But how? And that's what we've been trying to tackle, the nuts and bolts of this, of how do we do that by trying to answer some of these questions of, how do you make those decisions? How do you, uh, create that salt and light in the workplace? Um, so let's see, we got one more question.
We may have to hold it. I'm up against a break, and so let's hold that
Right. No, no,
question.
no. That's what I'm saying. We got one more question from Joe that, that's where I was going with that. That we'll pick
Yeah.
up next week. Um, I think between that question and answering some more of these, I think that's what we'll do next week. We'll answer Joe's fifth question, and then we'll get back into, taking the rose tint off Michael's glasses, and how corporate America
I
works.
want to pick at that scab a little bit more next time too, because I, I here's a question that I would posit and put out for our consideration next time is, if the disconnect between um, the small business environment and the corporate environment is as stark as we are purporting that it is that inevitable? Is it inevitable that small businesses that grow create a less um, a less moral environment? I'd be let's not answer that right now, but
Right.
the
But
things we're saying are so generally true that we seem to generally accept them. Obviously, there are exceptions, but why have they happened? I'd be interested in that conversation.
right. And we'll ask listeners kind of to think about that too. Fire in if you've got questions, suggestions on that. The one thing I will throw in balance as we close is that also, we're both limited to our own experiences, right? And there are scumbag small businesses out there just as
Oh,
well as there
oh,
are,
for
you
sure,
know,
for sure.
good publicly traded companies. So again, I'm not, and again, I don't want to disparage every company I've been worked at, right? They're not all bad. There's not all full of bad people. But we're talking in generalities. Anytime we're talking in generalities, that's where we get to. But I think there is absolutely a difference of control. And so let's talk about how and to affect culture and the differences between small and large businesses, kind of as we move forward. Also interesting, just to very quick note, is small businesses far outnumber large businesses too. And so that's an interesting statistic as we kind of go down this pipeline. Down the road. Thank you for tuning in with us. Thank you for, if you're still listening, or you've listened now for like the third or fourth time, you just keep hitting pause because you don't have an hour to drive somewhere. We appreciate you staying on with us. We enjoy this, and hopefully it helps get you something out of it too, as we banner through these conversations, through these topics. Again, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have anything, comment below. This will be on Facebook and on YouTube, and the podcast through iTunes and through Podbean. Or email us, text us, whatever. We'd be happy to have you guest, just like Joe did this morning. Again, big thank you to Joe for sending us questions. As I'd sent back to him, this is, I'm sure, several hours worth of him asking us 4 questions.
He's gonna be so disappointed.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to apologize, but I will be honest with the apology. Look, you're working with minimal talent here.
Should have known that.
Thank you, Michael. Have a good day. Thank you all for tuning in with us. We'll see you next time.
See you, brother.